Module 10, Upper Room and Whole Room GUV Safety. In this section, we explore upper room and whole room GUV safety rules, how to know what level of GUV exposure is safe, national and international organizations promoting GUV safety, and upper room and whole room GUV safety exposure limits. So here are some of the safety rules when considering upper room GUV fixtures. Fixtures need to be installed correctly to prevent unwanted exposures. Only authorized personnel should install fixtures to keep building occupants safe from exposure. Occupant safety is verified by installers and maintenance personnel who validate that exposure to GUV does not exceed safety guidelines. Several organizations developed safety guidelines to help prevent overexposure to GUV. There are several organizations, national and international, that promote germicidal ultraviolet safety. They include the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, ICNIR, International Organization of Standards, ISO, International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC, and National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH. These organizations mostly relate to harmful sunlight exposures, meaning to the dangerous UVB wavelengths, but they also offer safety guidelines on UVC. The previously named organizations all provide certain information on how to determine what GUV level is safe. So in 1972, CDC and NIOSH published recommended exposure limits, abbreviated REAL, for occupational exposure to UV radiation. So REAL is intended to protect workers from the acute effects of UV overexposure. The American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, ACGIH, issued similar values, which are called threshold limit values, for occupational exposure to ultraviolet radiation. The REALs and TLVs for occupational exposure to UV incident on skin or eye are based on the irradiance and time of exposure. So these values, TLVs and REALs, have guidance on occupational limits, which are limited to direct exposure of the eyes, but considered goals regarding skin exposure. So the TLV and REAL values are actually the same for 254 nanometers. Let's have a look at ACGIH's threshold limit values, TLVs. In the US, our widely used professional exposure guidelines are known as TLVs. They're based on occupancy use of spaces treated by upper room and whole room GUV systems. GUV inspection, maintenance, and repair workers typically do not remain in one location. They move around, so during their 8-hour workday are not overexposed to GUV. CDC NIOSH requires PPE if exposures are exceeded. So here the REAL is calculated as a time-weighted average at a steady state of continuous exposure for that duration. So this average value is then taken. Now, time-weighted average takes the average GUV exposure that a person may receive while standing, sitting, or walking through an area with upper room GUV luminaires in a period of 8 hours, assuming a workday length. Here we see an example of time-weighted average to assess the risk of germicidal ultraviolet irradiation overexposure. This image shows that depending on the height a person may be at in a room, sitting, standing, the intensity or the exposure can vary greatly. So during a day, most individuals do not remain in a fixed position, they move around. Properly installed and commissioned upper room GUV luminaires will not exceed exposure guidelines. A time-weighted average is calculated at a steady state, continuous GUV exposure for the duration of the exposure to upper room and whole room, or their combinations. So determining a time-weighted average is important for occupant safety because that really will help us understand if a person may become overexposed in a 8-hour workday. Let's review the key points. Occupant safety is verified by installers and maintenance personnel who validate that exposure to GUV does not exceed safety guidelines. CDC NIOSH published a recommended exposure limit for occupational exposure to UV radiation to keep workers safe. The American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists issued similar threshold limit values for occupational exposure to ultraviolet radiation. Time-weighted average takes the average GUV exposure a person may receive while standing, sitting, or walking through an area with upper room and/or whole room GUV luminaires in a period of 8 hours.